All right, welcome back to the Hurdle Rate, episode 22. I'm Tim Kotzman. I'm here with Matt Cole, Jeff Walton, and Ben Workman. And yesterday was the 5-year anniversary of Strategy announcing their Bitcoin Treasury strategy. So that was pretty cool to see pop up on the timeline. 100x growth in 5 years with BTC. Maybe we can get into thinking about the next 5 years and lots of other news, including Bo Hines moving into the private sector. Maybe over to you, Ben Workman. What are your thoughts on what Bo might do next?
I'll actually start with saying, strategy being 5 years into this already is incredible because it feels like it was just yesterday still. I don't know how it feels for everyone else, but since the time when COVID popped up, it just seems like we've been in a time warp, and it doesn't possibly feel like this strategy has been going on for 5 years already. So it's really, really incredible to see what they've accomplished, going from zero to 628,000 Bitcoin in a matter of 5 years. It's unbelievable. The performance of the equity has been unbelievable. And I know we'll dive into this a lot more here in just a minute. But yeah, it was a very major announcement seeing that Bo Hines was moving into the private sector. And, I think a lot of people are more surprised probably than they should be by that. This is one of those industries now where there's a war for talent. And Bo is obviously one of those guys because of the visibility he had working with the White House and trying to push all of this forward that is going to command a lot of attention no matter where he goes. So I would guess that he's probably on his, 10th to 20th offer out of the private sector here before somebody finally enticed him to move out of it. But, this is kind of the path that happens in politics. And particularly when you're focused on an area like Bitcoin and digital assets that are really emerging as one of the focal points out there, and there's a huge amount of capital being dedicated to it in the private markets. It really didn't surprise me at all. There's always going to be an uphill battle on the strategic reserve, and I think that others will pick up that mantle because now I think it's become such a sticking point that both investors and citizens, particularly when you hear about how many people now have exposure to Bitcoin, whether it's through the ETFs or whether it's through their own custody, this is becoming a major topic that you can't ignore anymore. So I don't think that momentum stops on any of this legislation. I don't think that it's going to draw away from the strategic reserve. But I do think that it's a sign of what you're going to see now for a while. You're going to see people who have been, very public, in that sector, right, working in the government, that are eventually going to move their way into the private sector. You've seen it in the healthcare industry for a long time. You've seen it in the medical and the biopharmaceuticals. I mean, you've just seen this play out over and over. So all in all, it was not overly surprising because I would have been more surprised if he wasn't getting offers that he just couldn't ignore at this stage.
I would much prefer someone to go and serve in government and then step down and rejoin the private sector than what I think we've seen from a lot of politicians for the last several decades, which is to make government service your career and you try to monetize your career through service versus serve. And serve could be for a handful of months. It could be for a handful of years. It could be on the back end of your career after you've made it and you become a successful business person, which is what we're seeing a lot in this current administration. A lot of business people that are billionaires that love this country and they want to bring their business expertise in. This is what government service is supposed to be. And, Bo came in, he, did, even though, we all want to see a, strategic Bitcoin reserve done, I don't think it's because of Bo. It's, I think the reality here is to actually do this well and in a sustained way, you need 60 votes in the Senate, and they don't have 60 votes is the bottom line here. And, hopefully we get to 60 votes. I, will remain adamant that I think that ultimately the success of the government implementing a Bitcoin or crypto strategy will depend on a strategic Bitcoin reserve implemented. It's the most important thing, and by a landslide, but they don't have the votes. And so that's how DC goes. We got to get more Bitcoin politicians into DC, and you get a handful more. I think we can get that done, but it's just not there. So, congrats to Bo on what he drove, and I think it'll be interesting to see what's next. I mean, he could probably join any team that he wants to. He could start his own thing, but I do agree with you, Ben, that it's a war for talent right now. When kind of looking at the newer Bitcoin treasury companies, like most of us are all friends. The place where there is competition is for talent. Like that is, and it's friendly competition, but it's a place, and it's kind of why when people are like, I want to get into Bitcoin, what should I do? It's like, prove yourself, create a track record that you can create value, because if you can, there is not enough talent in this space right now. I mean, I know that there's more talent out there, but that talent needs to prove itself just a bit. So it'll be interesting to see what's next for Bo.
I have nothing to add. He's 29 years old and whooping ass. And there's going to be a lot of people that want his exposure.
He's 29. I knew he was young. I didn't realize he was 29.
Yeah, he's 29. And there's so much opportunity in this space. This is the best time ever to be working in Bitcoin. And thinking about the commercial opportunities, it's a no-brainer.
If you had to speculate, Jeff, if you've got nothing to add, you gotta speculate on where you think Bo might end up. If you had to guess, where would you be guessing right now?
He's at some sort of Bitcoin treasury company, I would assume, or some sort of digital asset treasury company. It might surprise everybody. It could go a different route, but I would suspect he's going to one of these businesses that's going to put as much Bitcoin or ETH or some digital asset on their balance sheet as humanly possible.
Yeah, I'll be curious if it ends up being, a Bitcoin treasury company, or if he ends up at like one of the major exchanges. If they want somebody that can, be in the political sphere, continuing to lobby and advocate for what they're trying to push forward, right? That'll all depend on how Bo's aligned, right? If he wants to be a full-on Bitcoiner and he wants to focus on Bitcoin only, that's going to very much solidify the path that he's going to take. But obviously, these exchanges are going to have a huge amount of money that they can offer to people like Bo. Same thing with the stablecoin issuers, right? I could see a Circle trying to go after a Bo, try to bring him in on that cause. I mean, there's a lot of directions this could go. So I'll be curious to see where it ends up.
Yeah, the exchanges have so much capital that are flowing through them. Yeah, they could probably have lucrative offers to put in front of them. And they're all hyper competitive right now as well.
Very, yeah. But to the war on talent side, I think that there's also kind of this scramble at the moment to solidify your team if you're going to be in the treasury space. Because I do think that you've probably got over the next 12 months, you're going to have one pack of these companies really separate themselves from the rest that are going to be able to operate at the institutional scale. And so I think now when you see, what a powerhouse team strategy was, I can see a lot of these other companies doing that talent grab and trying to build up their roster to be able to compete in that arena, given the amount of capital that's going to be flowing through that space, right? This is the time where you set the foundation to be able to build for yourself going forward. And I think companies are starting to take that very seriously because they're seeing the longevity, but they're also seeing the path to executing the treasury strategy efficiently and effectively, and what that actually takes. We didn't have full visibility into all the different roles you would need to fill to really pull this off on a grand scale. And now that people are starting to see that, I think that the next, 4 to 5 months are just going to be packed full of these types of announcements as people do that talent grab.
Jeff, did you have a take on ETH treasury companies and scale? Is what I have in my notes. I'm so intrigued versus yeah.
They've been getting a lot of attention recently. Tom Lee's been publicly out on a news channel saying ETH has the potential to flip Bitcoin. And, on the onset, my first response is like, no way, right? No way. And so then my brain went to, okay, let me do the math. let me just think about the math and think about what it would take for this to happen. How does an ETH treasury company look and compare to a Bitcoin treasury company? What's the scale? How does the capital structure look? What is the relativity? What's the probability of this whole potential landscape? And what does it look like? Ultimately, I think this, like an ETH treasury company, is probably really good for Ethereum, because you have companies that are using Ethereum as their treasury reserve asset and starting to do very similar things to what Strategy is doing. And I think what Tom Lee has mentioned is they're trying to be the MicroStrategy of Ethereum. So I took a look at just the general landscape, and Bitminer, so BMNR is the ticker, holds 833,000 ETH, so valued at 3.5 billion, and their market cap as of today is 6.6 billion. And of the total network, they have 69 basis points of the total Ethereum network. And compare that to Strategy. Strategy holding 628,000 Bitcoin has 2.99. So, 2.99% of the network. So, what would it take for Bitminer, Tom Lee's company, to catch MSTR from a Bitcoin dominance perspective? Its relativity of what percentage of the market it owns, and all else equal, assuming Strategy doesn't accumulate any additional Bitcoin, BMNR would need to acquire 2.7 million Ethereum, which would cost $11.8 billion. And that's roughly nearly 3 times the amount of existing capital that they have. So they need to go get $11.8 billion, assuming the price of Ethereum didn't go up relative to the $3.5 billion that they've already got on their balance sheet. And the way you do that is you monetize any premium you've got in your equity. So they could go monetize the premium in their equity and issue more shares out to the market, or they could start to leverage their balance sheet. But if you're going to leverage your balance sheet sustainably, you can only lever maybe 1 billion, 2 billion, and you'd have to go through the entire process that Strategy's gone through and start issuing convertible debt or preferred equity, and you talk with bankers, go IPO different products, get that out to market. All of that takes a significant amount of time. And I think Strategy and all these other Bitcoin treasury companies are operating behind the scenes doing the exact same thing. So I think my general perspective on the scale and the math here is that Bitcoin has got a significant lead. There are significantly more companies that are adopting a Bitcoin treasury standard than an Ethereum treasury standard. And all of that energy and the decentralized nature of it it will be difficult in my mind for Ethereum to catch up or surpass Bitcoin just mathematically, understanding the structure and architecture of the market and backing into some of the math and what the incentives are and the financial strength required to issue that much debt and that much leverage into the system to build long-term permanent capital financial strength in those different ecosystems.
So I'm actually really concerned long term about how this will negatively impact Ethereum and these other altcoins, which I'm already bearish on generally speaking, and they go in their waves. But right now, I think there's a wave up, and the wave up is capital flowing in. It's primarily equity capital. But why when you look at Strategy's 2Q call, what are they calling as the justification for long-term MNAV? It's intelligent leverage. And intelligent leverage breaks down for altcoin treasury companies, because the whole game with regards to Bitcoin is that we are debasing fiat currencies. And if you can take intelligent long-term leverage on one side and buy Bitcoin on the other side, that trade will work out over the long run. That trade does not work with altcoins. There is no tie, in my view, to the debasement of money in Ethereum. The tie is that they're trying to drive is based on stablecoin usage, which I think is really shaky because maybe, Tron is the winner or Solana or name your new structure. I don't see why Ethereum needs to be the major winner in that. But I would be very nervous if I was an investor, to say we have, 40% perpetual preferred equity leverage for an Ethereum treasury company. How does that work when the bear market hits? Because there's no reason it's tied to network usage, and the goal that there's going to be some, accrual of value to each shareholders through network usage. It's not tied to digital gold. And I think that the whole thesis, and it kind of comes back to this biblical principle that I've talked about building your house on a rock. You build your house on sand, and the biblical analogy here is that people build the house. And so I think that these Ethereum treasury companies are going to build the house. They're going to accumulate, in my view, a lot of Ethereum. And I think that's what's happening right now. And there's a decent chance that in the short term that house could look like a nice house. But how it ages, I think it ages horribly. But I'm not of the view that it doesn't have to, the house won't necessarily be built in the short term.
My concern always falls back to stability and certainty. And when I look at the history of Ethereum, I see anything but stability and certainty. There's been a lot of changes and upgrades that have been made. They've got the foundation behind Ethereum. They've made changes to the tokenomics around Ethereum several times. And in order to capitalize a company for the long term on an asset, I think you fundamentally need to know that the way that asset is going to behave is not going to change. And I can't say that for Ethereum because I've got a long history that tells me that it's going to change frequently. And the reason it seems to change frequently is because Ethereum you view more in the technology stack than the capital stack, right? It's a technology that's constantly trying to figure out exactly what it's going to be. You're bolting on new capabilities. You're not quite sure of what the impacts of that capability being introduced are going to be. And so ultimately, you may need to make changes to the way the tokens are issued or the tokens are burned or the fee structure. And there's just a lot of questions that come into that. And I can understand and I can wrap my head around the long-term use case for Bitcoin treasury companies because I can see the structural problem that Bitcoin is solving out there around monetary debasement and the protection of value. I don't have any clear visibility path on that for Ethereum. And because of that, as an investor, it would make me very nervous because I don't know what thesis it is that I'm investing in now. There's going to be a lot of them, right? And it's going to use a lot of the different buzzwords that are out there. People are going to look at stable coins and stablecoin dominance and applications on the blockchain, and they're going to highlight the flexibility. But if I need certainty, right? If I'm putting the foundation, to use Matt's analogy, if I'm building my foundation on rock, I need to have a thesis and a problem that I'm solving that this asset is tailor-made to solve. And Bitcoin does that for the weaknesses in fiat currencies. I'm not sure exactly what Ethereum does that for. And to Matt's point, I think you have to look at competition and what can emerge in the future, because that's a major risk to that type of an investment. When I look at something like Bitcoin and how decentralized Bitcoin is, the scale it's achieved, the security the network's achieved, the way that both politicians and companies and individuals have aligned along one asset, that is escape velocity of an asset. It's very tough to bring in a new asset that's going to disrupt that. However, for something that's more attuned to a technology layer, your competition can purely be on fees. You can get a cheaper version of Ethereum that does the same function that could disrupt that entire model. So, I just have an issue seeing the long-term value proposition of any of these other digital asset treasuries. I know we've also seen like a Dogecoin treasury popped up recently. Like, there's going to be craziness everywhere. It's just going to happen in markets. But, now obviously getting a spokesperson like a Tom Lee out there in front of these Ethereum treasuries, you're going to see a lot more about this. And I think the recent performance is going to bring a lot of investors into that space in the short term. But I just have long-term concerns about the way that holds up. And it's not something I can have nearly enough confidence in. And quite frankly, I haven't for a very long time to be able to dedicate any capital to that space whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely. And I started with the math. Maybe I should have started with the thesis. But Ben, Ben and Matt in complete agreement here. The way I got to the math is I was thinking to myself, okay, how would I go sell this to big capital? How would I go sell this story? If I'm just sitting on $5 billion of capital and I want to go issue a preferred instrument, like, what is my story? And I was really struggling to wrap my head around the story. And that's kind of what you're getting at, Ben, is that, the infrastructure of Ethereum has changed over time. There's a centralized team and system that controls and manages Ethereum. There's all these other alternative coins out there that operate similarly with different fee structures and different speed and different, benefits and things. So it was, when I think about Strategy and their financial strength, $70 billion, $75 billion of Bitcoin held on balance sheet. And you think about taking on the risk of $2 billion of perpetual preferred equity. That's a risk profile that is kind of a little bit easier to wrap your head around. Now, what would it take for any of these ETH treasury companies to have that same level of confidence in the capital markets to operate and generate that much additional capital with leverage, with long-term liabilities, with no concern or just less concern that they're going to lose their capital. And it's just a completely different story. It's a completely different story that you've got to communicate to the market. And I think they will struggle. They'll probably do pretty well in a period of euphoria where alt season is happening, capital's flying all over the place, maybe liquidity's heating up, and people are making speculative investments. But I think to your point, Matt, we're in this uptrend, and when things shift or if there's a change in market sentiment, that can change rapidly to the alternative direction. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this whole thing plays out. But it's just gotten a ton of noise on X, and I mean the stock performance is undeniable. I think the stock was up another 20% today. It's just one of these takes you back moments. But it was worth some analysis and thinking about and talking in the marketplace about.
I guess, Jeff, to what you just said, is this potentially the latest iteration of confusion between crypto and Bitcoin, digital assets at Bitcoin? Leave stablecoins to the side for a moment. I mean, a lot of people are going to see this marketed to them as, well, they're all crypto treasury companies. I mean, is that a concern? I mean, and you have these people, that are Bitcoin focused, and then what's happening? They're getting bored. There's financial incentives. They're looking at other technical innovation, or am I barking up the wrong tree?
I think you're right. I think a lot of people feel like they missed strategy, and that's where we're at now. Right there, they've got $75 billion of capital, and they're trading at $120 billion. People think, well, I can't, in order for strategy to 10x, it's got to go to 1.2 trillion. What's the probability of that? Now, in order for an ETH treasury company that's trading at $6 billion, in order for them to 10x, they only got to go to 60 billion. So there's more, I guess, to some people, there might be a better risk return trade-off of that trade, but they may be going significantly further out on the risk curve, taking significantly more risk than a company that's in a position of financial strength or backed by Bitcoin. So, that's a good question, Tim. I think it was a period of confusion and everything being lumped into a crypto bucket, and people feeling like they missed out on certain trades and moving in a different direction. Curious to get your guys' take, though.
Yeah, I mean, my libertarian capitalist instinct says there's nothing to be done about this, but except for educate the market and tell the truth at all times, that as we see it, as we understand it. But when I look back at what I've seen over the last few market cycles in the entire crypto industry, what I've seen is that almost every average investor loses money as it's going up, because they tend to go out, they miss the initial trade because they're living their lives and, whatever. They're not watching every part of the market like all of us, MSTR Bitcoin nerds over here. And so then they come in and I'm too late. What's the next thing? Because I missed strategy and so they then will go out the risk curve and will likely buy many of these altcoin treasury companies. And then how it's worked historically, at least what I've observed in markets, is that for some period of time, they're on paper up a lot of money, and then it just ends in shambles. Like they start putting more and more money in, and then the market corrects, and then during the bear market, they kind of unload their position and may have ended up with actually losing money, not making money. That's been the cycle for, I think, many people in the broader crypto industry historically. And I don't see a reason why that wouldn't be my base case right now. And then on the back end of that, what I think you're going to see is the handful of Bitcoin treasury companies that are going to emerge winners in the long run. But in the short term, I think I think there's going to be a lot of market confusion, and we'll do our best to educate, but I don't know that we'll be able to educate away the greed that I think that some people will feel in the markets. So hopefully we can get this out there and convince people to not put their life savings in the next random altcoin, the Dogecoin Treasury company.
It just might be the new rotation that we're seeing right now. You used to have Bitcoin and then you'd have alt season. Now you had Bitcoin Treasury company season. Now you've got altcoin Treasury company season. But, to me, you're basically playing chicken with innovation when it comes to any of these other digital assets. And when you're thinking about technology, it becomes a race to the bottom. And you're just waiting for some type of, cross-chain protocol to come out where people are routing transactions to a cheaper chain to get their transactions done. And all of a sudden, all these base layer chains become less important to the overall ecosystem. And I feel like you're putting your eggs in a basket where you're saying this technology cannot be disrupted. And I don't think you can say that clearly for any of these rails that are going to facilitate the stablecoin networks right now. Whereas with something like Bitcoin, I think you can look at it and say it's far more difficult to disrupt Bitcoin. It has so many unique characteristics. It's been so stable. It's so predictable. People understand how it works. Its simplicity is an asset. With all these other protocols, there's just a huge amount of complexity to them that, most people will never understand. Whereas Bitcoin, because it's hyper-focused on one use case, people can understand it. Companies can understand it. It's truly decentralized, and because of the problem it solves, it's broadly desirable amongst all entity types, right? Whether you're a nation state, an individual, a company, you can always see what that value is in having that sovereign digital asset. So I just don't think there's a comparison, but to your point, Matt, for free markets, people get to put their capital where they're confident. And if people are confident in this, they're going to move their capital to it. And all you can do is highlight what you think the risks are going to be associated with each of these, different companies that pop up, and that's what you can do.
I had a thought the other day, just thinking about the extreme here. What if a company buys all of it? What if they buy like 95% of it, and that they're going to keep buying the rest of it? And how does that impact how the market views it? And that's just something to think about. It was my brain was trying to wrap my head around like centralization, and like maybe there's a push to control it and get to 25, 50, 60% of Ethereum, and then you control it. And what does that look like? And where does regulation come in? what are these things defined as? Is that a possibility? And yeah, the world's going to look so much different 20 years from now. We're so early to all of this. It's fun to speculate on.
I mean, I think if you end up in that situation, then it probably will greatly diminish the desirability of that asset, right? If someone's got 95% of it, it's basically their token, their network now, right? They've got all the vote. They're in charge of it. They control it. People look at strategy right now and go, are they centralizing too much of the network? And they own 3%. And I go, all right, well, I'll use gold as an example here. If I put, 100 1-ounce gold bars on the ground, and then I took 3 of them, do you walk away and say the rest of those are useless? Probably not, right?
No.
So, it's just a very different setup, and they're at very different maturity cycles in terms of adoption. So I do think that right now you've got that opportunistic angle that people are going to try to play on where, because there's not the same level of competition for acquiring ETH, some companies are going to view that in the short term as a way to, separate themselves and be able to really accumulate heavily in the early days. And, you may see some of them that use it as an accelerant, and they're going to raise through ETH first, try to get that huge premium, and then they may start swapping over to Bitcoin eventually and saying, well, now we're building for the long term, but we used ETH as a tool to get there. So I could see that happening while there's excitement and euphoria around it, but I'm not confident in the long term here.
Well, it took strategy. So to go back to the just relativities here, Bitminer has 69 basis points of the network, which 69 basis points of the Bitcoin network would be 144,953 Bitcoin. And it took strategy 3 years to get that. They had 140,000 Bitcoin in April of 2023. So to your point, Ben, right? It's a grab, and there's companies chasing that control.
Eventually, you'd have to look and wonder, though, right? Say one company, whichever company it is, say one of these companies is just accumulating at a blistering pace, right? And they're accumulating just a huge amount of this because it doesn't take nearly as much capital right now to acquire those percentages of the supply. You got to ask yourself eventually, well, why are they still able to get it so cheap?
Yeah.
Why isn't everyone else competing to get this too, right? I mean, price moves up when you're competing, right? When there's competition in the market to accumulate and you're exhausting the sellers. And that wouldn't be what you were seeing if the price just stays low and one of these companies able to, it'll be the headlines, right? They'll talk about how much faster of a path they're on than MicroStrategy was. And I go,
That's the
well,
story.
it's a harder battle to acquire Bitcoin because it's so desirable for so many entities, right? Everyone has a use case for Bitcoin. Not everyone has the same for ETH. So you're competing in a very small pocket of the markets. So you might be able to accumulate faster, but you got to ask, is that an asset or not?
Yeah, yeah.
Is that really something that you should be touting, that there's just not enough competition, that you're not having to move the price up to find the next tranche of supply? Whereas in Bitcoin, if you want to go accumulate $10 billion of Bitcoin, that price is going to have to move up to the next level where you can unlock supply for it because people don't want to sell it.
Right. Is it a commodity, a security, or a token?
Yep.
As fiat systems falter, wealth preservation isn't a strategy, it's survival. While the world reacts, Swan Private clients are already prepared. Swan Private builds strong relationships with clients around mutual conviction in Bitcoin's long-term promise. With concierge service, deep expertise, and airtight security, the Swan Private team helps build generational wealth the right way. Swan Private's comprehensive Bitcoin wealth platform serves over 5,000 clients with more than $4.5 billion of Bitcoin purchased to cold storage. Swan Private is built for long-term partnerships. Get started today at swan.com/private.
What do you got next on that list there, Tim?
Tim's got a big conference coming up in
Oh my gosh, yeah.
in like 35 days. Tim Kotzman's Unconference in New York.
Well, you got to skip past that one, Jeff. Tim's got a conference tomorrow.
You got one tomorrow,
got a big one
but
tomorrow.
I do want you to explain to everyone what is an unconference.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So an unconference, many of us were out in Santa Monica last fall, and Fred Krueger put on the only unconference I've ever been to. So there were kind of like 4 sofa sets, and there were 1 or 2 or 3 thought leaders that would kind of kick off a discussion, let's say once an hour. And they'd kick it off with, a few minutes worth of kind of introducing the subject. And then everyone in this kind of like square of sofa sets, or think of just people standing in a circle, they start asking questions or adding commentary. And it kind of turns into like a real life Twitter space. And, some guys that were there thought this is going to be a total train wreck. And by the end of it, I had multiple people say to me, guys that are much older and wiser than I am, this was the best conference I've ever been to in my entire life. High quality people and conversations where you're not just sitting there observing all day. So that was the initial thought for the unconference. What it's now kind of developed into is we'll have Saylor kick it off with a keynote at 10 a.m., doors open at 8. And then from there, we'll have 1 or 2 or 3 thought leaders come up on stage and do very much the same thing. Introduce a topic, maybe talk for a few minutes, 5-10 minutes, and then we'll be out in the audience with people being able to add in commentary, ask questions. With it being live streamed, we'll have to keep it a little more crisp, a little more controlled. But the other aspect of it on conference is in advance, the community kind of comes up with the topics. So as we're having conversations with people that are registering and with people that want to participate and be involved in different ways, we're asking for feedback on potential topics. We're going to send that out to the community within the next couple of weeks. And whether you think of it as like upvoting or just voting for different topics, we'll see what's the most popular at that period of time to really try to have not spicy topics for the sake of being controversial, but things that are very topical and things that people really want to discuss, and that they're there because they really want different takes and they want to have their voices heard. So very participant driven. And I think my goal would be for everyone in the audience there that's live at the event to feel like at any moment in time, like if they had some commentary or they had a question, that they, could literally just stand up and have their voice heard. I think that being very interactive is just kind of taking it to the next level, and it is a little bit different from what you see and hear and feel at some of the conferences.
And what's been the reception so far, both from people who are just going to be participants, but also from the companies that are going to be attending? I mean, you've got a pretty wide range of people coming in for this one from everything I've seen. So what's that been like?
Yeah, so we have attendees from all over the world, UAE, Australia, trying to think of places that are far from New York. So all over the world. We have both, we kind of think of it in three segments of how we're trying to, connect the investors, the Bitcoin Treasury companies themselves, and the service providers. And maybe there's a fourth category that we haven't thought of yet or haven't identified. But it's been a very positive response, and it's still developing. But from when I first kind of announced it, I think July 1st to now, I think all of us have been in that room in Midtown Manhattan. It can seat 500 comfortably. We have over 200 tickets already sold. So I think it'll be whether we have to do rows of chairs or round tables with chairs, having that live element will be kind of the next level, or, what that conference environment, but also having it live streamed out so that, whether it's live or replayed, be able to really include everyone in the community. So yeah, been very positive so far, but also kind of early in the discussions as far as how different people want to interact and how they're trying to reach the people that they're trying to connect with is super interesting. And I was actually at a lunch last week with a guy that's on the capital markets side of a yet to be announced international treasury company. He's here in New York, and he said, Tim, when I reach out to guys, he's been in capital markets in New York for, call it 30 years. He said, no one is interested in Bitcoin. It's unbelievable. And, I'm sitting in like the Bitcoin bubble in New York. Like, that's wild for me to hear that, it really takes these guys that he said, look, I've been in this specific part of capital markets for a long time. And I thought, I believe in Bitcoin. I want to do something different. And, through all of the connections that we've all experienced, some by design, some very accidental, found himself linking up with a group that's going to launch one of these deals. And kind of is still hard to reconcile for me. And now I'm just rambling, but that you can have all of these guys like ourselves that are so Bitcoin focused and convicted and very active in the area, and still have lots of well-known names and billionaire names that they could just really care less. And like we see it on X all day long, but yeah, very, very interesting to just have all of these conversations, and also to see the cooperation between companies, of people wanting to help, people wanting to not be what you probably see in traditional finance, where it's very competitive and secretive, and there's really no reason why you would want to help someone that is just maybe perceived as a competitor. So that's been really, really, really neat and unique probably to see. Although I've never been in like the cubicle corporate job world, from what I hear from friends and family, it's not always ideal. So it's been pretty interesting to just be kind of boots on the ground here through all of these different iterations of ideas and podcasts to digital conferences to now an in-person conference. And very humbling to have people reaching out and saying, how can I help? But also, I think it really goes to the community. It's a digital community in some aspects, but it's amazing to see how many people are like, well, this doesn't happen every day, and I'm willing to make the sacrifice to come to some of these in-person events where you can really be around the community, but also be around the rest of that cohort in that bucket, right? Whether it's the Bitcoin Treasury company executives, analysts, or it's the investors, analysts or it's, I don't know how much the service providers hang out outside of events, but maybe it's a whole brave new world.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing how quickly things, develop in this space, particularly when you look back to, just where you were a year ago. Right? I mean, you were really just starting out and starting to push on things, and now here you are a year later launching conferences and digital conferences, and you're going to be up for 21 hours tomorrow, doing your digital conference as well. I mean, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, no, I think there's plenty of, as we've already said in different ways, from the talent perspective, there's so much opportunity, and if you just put yourself out there, whether it's long posts, Ben Workman 1.0, or whether it's CNBC Ben Workman 2.0, it's all there for those that really want to kind of put themselves out there first of all, because that takes some courage, and then really put in the work. So yeah, it's just a really exciting time.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I think we do have to circle back. I know I talked about it briefly at the beginning, but the 5-year anniversary of Strategy kicking off this, and that was as of yesterday. So August 10 was when they first made the announcement that started, what they've started to call the Bitcoin standard era for Strategy. And Jeff, I'd be curious to hear your take on this. I mean, you've been along on this journey for a very long time as well. And it's come a long way from where we started and where we first connected, but that was even a couple years in to Strategy launching this strategy on their own. So yeah, I can't even come up with another word to use. They've cornered the market on it. I'd be curious. I'd just be curious to hear your reflections on the journey and kind of the way you followed it along and the performance that they've had so far. And
yeah, that's a great question. The numbers are astonishing. When you go back and you look at their first purchase, you go back and you look at the company and what it was in 2020, and they had $500 million in cash on hand, and the software business that was profitable, making some money, but they were never going to compete with Microsoft or any of the big guys. And then they did something different. They bought $250 million of Bitcoin at $11,652. And they acquired 21,454 Bitcoin. And that was it. That was a monumental moment. And now fast forward today, 5 years later, and now Strategy holds $75 billion worth of Bitcoin on their balance sheet, when 5 years ago they had $500 million. So it's incredible that a company can grow that quickly, that fast, and store that much energy into a publicly traded corporate vehicle that's becoming more and more efficient into the future. I mean, as Saylor put it on our True North podcast last week, this is today, Strategy is the least efficient that they're going to be in their future. So they're only going to get stronger and better moving forward. And it's just an incredible journey. And yeah, I don't think people can really fathom how hard that is, how hard it is to raise money and then have that continue to appreciate. That on average, over the last 1,825 days, Strategies made $400 million a day in either capital raise or appreciation of the assets that they hold. And that is just an insane number.
That is a mind-boggling number.
And that is attributed to now 15 people, but obviously when you back it up, I don't know, probably on average 5 people.
Yep.
Yeah, tiny team raising $440 million a day for that 1,825 days in a row. It's just insane. It's crazy numbers for a math nerd, right? You're like, how, and people still are saying that Andy Constant on what Bitcoin did with Lynn Alden is saying, MSTR is a Ponzi scheme. Still hasn't bought Bitcoin, by the way. He's been watching it since 2015. Put out a bid order at 84,000 and then chased himself away from it and can't wrap his head around Bitcoin. Is still calling this a Ponzi scheme. And yeah, it's incredible to see. That's just a strange world we live in.
Well, and it's wild to watch even just how the investor community has evolved around all of this. I mean, a couple of years ago, when you would go out and try to find any information around Strategy whatsoever, it was like non-existent. I would say just 2 years ago, it was
Yeah.
non-existent.
Yeah.
Nobody was really paying attention to any of this. You know, the headlines
2023.
back then were still about how it was over and he took a gamble and he lost. And, like it's just been an incredible evolution. And it's one of the few areas I've seen that has ignited investors into starting to look towards what the possibilities are for one specific industry. I think that every other strategy that you see a company deploy out there comes with so much complexity around it that investors are quick to throw up their hands. And while this one, at its foundational level, is very simple, right? Accumulate Bitcoin, increment Bitcoin per share. That's what you're doing, right? That's the focus. But the ways you get that done have evolved so greatly and now are accelerating so much faster in terms of what's possible that just being able to focus on one goal, right? Bitcoin accumulation, Bitcoin per share, just being able to focus on that, you now get to expand your mind and learn about all these different capital markets. And the education that investors are getting from this is going to be invaluable moving into the future because you really learn how to separate. And one of the ways that people make a lot of money, you hear about all the diversification stuff, but it's really about that concentrated risk, right? If you can really become one of the best at identifying the opportunities in one specific segment, and you double down on that, the opportunities to make money are massive. And I think investors are starting to see that. And because this is an industry, one, yes, you have to have that foundational belief in Bitcoin, right? That's core to all of this. If you don't believe in the asset, you shouldn't be anywhere around this industry. But once you've already bridged that, you have the understanding of Bitcoin, you believe in Bitcoin, it allows you to focus and narrow. And that's why we're starting to see a lot of really creative analysis come out around how to best run this strategy from here forward, which is going to become really important because now, strategy blazed the trail. They opened all the markets. They proved the capital was there. They proved that this could be a resilient model over time through many different types of market cycles. But now investors get to look at, well, what would this look like if you started from a blank slate? If a company's just coming out of the gate, how do you deploy the strategy now? And that has to change the way that investors see these companies. And I think that that's just going to make this really exciting moving forward, on top of the fact that every one of these companies coming into this space and building a Bitcoin treasury, which quite frankly should be every company, not all in the same manner, but every company should have a Bitcoin treasury at some level, right? There's a weakness out there that you can't ignore as an executive. When you're trying to be a good steward of shareholder value, you do have to acknowledge that the US dollar is going to continue to debase because it has to. It's just adding so much to the Bitcoin ecosystem. With every new company that comes out, it amplifies the message. More and more people are now hearing about Bitcoin. They're finding ways to integrate it into their personal lives. New products are coming out around Bitcoin. It's just really created this new ecosystem that has a totally different level of energy than it used to have.
Let me summarize that. Strategy made finance cool again. Strategy made structured finance cool again. Strategy made analysis cool again. Strategy made data analysis cool again. And so many people, some of the feedback that we've gotten just from the community is, oh my God, I've learned so much in following this stock, more than I've learned in MBA or in college taking finance classes, because it's actual real life application and all of that information is just out there and available and pushing the envelope always.
People had stopped thinking differently. Yeah. That was one of the themes that we talked about early on when we were looking at these companies and everyone was trying to apply all of the standard valuation models to these and all the standard metrics. And people had lost the ability to think differently, right? They got in the mindset where everything's going to be the same all the time. So you can apply the same lens to everything. And that was one of the things. To become a Bitcoiner, you already had to think differently. You had to allow yourself to get out of the traditional norms and the things you'd been taught in the past. And you had to open your mind to new possibilities and, gameplay those out over a period of time. And I think that's what the Bitcoin treasury strategy and strategy being the pioneer launching this really did for a lot of people, was it unlocked that creativity again. And it said, you can look at the world in a different way. You don't have to see it the same as everybody else. There's opportunities out there. The world's evolving at warp speed right now. you've got to be ready to capitalize on what's coming your direction. Start thinking outside of the box. What you've learned is going to put you in a cage, and you need to escape from that cage if you're going to achieve success yourself.
And it kind of goes to why I think podcasts like our podcast, True North, are going to continue to be relevant for years to come. Like, as people learn, what is a pipe? What is convertible notes? Who are the investors of convertible notes? Who are the investors of perpetual preferreds? Now you have, what does it take to qualify for index inclusion at S&P or Vanguard? And as we're recording this, we just got an announcement, found out that Vanguard's now the second largest holder of ASST, which is just like hilarious, because they won't allow their clients to buy Bitcoin, but yet strategy and Bitcoin treasury companies like ours are, sneaking into the portfolios of their clients, thankfully for their clients, get some Bitcoin exposure. My concern is that their index inclusion rules probably also won't take out some of these newer Bitcoin treasury companies. They're probably just going to get all the crap in there, good and bad. But, I think everyone's going to have a PhD in every single different area of finance. As we go, as some of these fell, like what does investor protections look like when one of these companies fell? Like, why do they fail? What is too much leverage? And on the back end of this, hopefully people can make some good money, but they're going to get massive PhDs. There's just so many different angles. It feels like every week there's something new that we kind of have to unpack.
Well, I mean, that's literally the perfect spot to just say, I guess we'll have to come back next week for another episode of The Hurdle Rate. I'm Tim, for Jeff, Matt, and Ben. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week here on The Hurdle Rate.